Things Podcast. Hey, Phantomaniacs, welcome to the newest episode of the Needless Things Podcast, where we talk about toys, movies, music, and all manner of pop culture dorkery. I am your host, Dave, and I am taking a brief break from playing Resident Evil 2 to record the intro for this week's episode of the Needless Things Podcast, which is the promised second part of the Kirk Thatcher interview that was started way back in August of last year, episode 225. If you go listen to that, I talked to the absolutely lovely, incredible, gorgeous, talented, unparalleled Kirk Thatcher on episode 225. So go back and listen to that one first, and then come back and listen to Part 2, which was recorded live at DragonCon. Now, I understand I'm a little bit behind on posting the DragonCon panels. A few have gone up. The Ric Flair panel, the 1988 panel, and the video game panel have all been posted. I've still got a couple left to go. The Sting and Ric Flair panel will probably be the final one that I post from last year's DragonCon. But I like to space these things out. I don't want to have like a month of older recorded stuff. Not that it's in any way inferior, obviously, as today's absolutely incredible live panel with the gonzo Kirk Thatcher will prove, but I like to, we've got our commentaries, we've got things that are kind of timely. I want to mix it up as much as I can. So anyway, that's why the DragonCon panels have been kind of spread out over the last couple of months. So there you go. Today's is an awesome show. But that break from Resident Evil 2, let me tell you guys about this game. So I love horror. It's a big part of my life. Movies, comics, books, and video games to a somewhat lesser extent. Now, back in the day, I used to play video games a whole lot more than I do now. Sorry, I had to pause for a little sip of beverage there. You got to hydrate. Hydrating and gyrating. Very important, kids. Remember that. Which, by the way, speaking of, you need to go and check out Troublemaker, a film by Jason C. Wilson. If you Google that, you will find everything you need to know. I'll talk about that a little more on a future episode. But, so Resident Evil 2, the remake, or I guess, I don't know if remake is the right word, update, upgrade, whatever you want to call it. The graphics are incredible. The game is a delight to play because everything works about as well as it could possibly work. And the original one came out in like 98, I think. It's around 20 years ago. And I played it, but I really don't, if I sit down and think about it, I don't specifically remember it. I remember certain things about it, but the fun of replaying it is something will happen and I'll be like, oh, that's that thing. Or I'll find like a pipe with a gear in it and I'll be like, oh, I have to get that handle. Cool, I remember that. I don't know where it is, but I remember doing that. This is fun. And that's kind of like the compelling fun of the game for me, for somebody who has played it or played the older version of it, is getting these little whiffs of nostalgia as I'm playing through this gorgeous, incredible, scary gaming experience. The control is fantastic. I'll tell you right now, I'm playing it on assisted, which is like the wimpiest level you can play at. It has assist. It's not auto aim because it doesn't always go exactly where you need it to go, but it's assisted aiming, so it's a little easier to get headshots than it otherwise would be. There's a little more ammo around. Enemies do a little bit less damage. And it says you recover health slowly as the game goes on. I can't say I've noticed that, but in all honesty, I haven't. I actually, the reason I'm taking this break right now is I died for the first time. I won't say when because I don't want to spoil anything for anybody who hasn't played the game or doesn't remember it, because this was a fun surprise for me. But it's a certain point in the game. It's a huge WTF moment. That's what the fuck. Not Mark Maron doesn't show up and talk you to death, which honestly maybe would be the best and worst way to go. But it's a big, big moment, literally. And I knew what was coming, and I just didn't know what to do about it. So I did actually die for the first time. And so I was like, you know what? Let's take a little break. Let's get caught up on The Gifted, which, by the way, still the best X-Men show on or best X-Men adaptation, really, of any kind. Quality-wise, sure, Logan is probably the best film that has been made based on the idea of the X-Men. But adaptation-wise, as far as carrying forward the ideas from Marvel's X-Men comics, The Gifted is it. I love it, and I've said it before on the show. It's absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to get caught up on that, and then I'm going to get back to some Resident Evil now that I think I'm pretty sure I know how to handle this big situation that popped up. So, having said that, one more TV thing I want to talk about. If you're following me on Instagram, as you know, I like to say Phantom Troublemaker because it's kind of funny, but I am actually fully Phantom Troublemaker on Instagram. But if you're following me on Instagram, you're following me on Facebook as just Dave West, then you know I watched Silence of the Lambs the other night and was kind of re-enchanted all over again because it's one of those movies that I watched so many times that I got to the point where it wasn't special anymore. It's probably been a decade since I watched that movie. Watched it again the other night and was blown away all over again, and decided that I needed to try and revisit Hannibal, the television show, with Mads Mikkelsen as Hannibal, and what's his name? Hugh Dancy, is that right? Is Will as the investigator, and the incredible Lawrence Fishburne as Jack. Can't remember his last name right now. But anyway, when the show first came on, I didn't check it out because it just looked... Well, one, the idea of somebody other than Anthony Hopkins playing Hannibal was just absurd at the time. And then once it ended up on Netflix, or maybe it was Amazon Prime, or maybe even... now that I'm thinking about it, I think we might have even recorded the first season and just couldn't stay caught up with it, and went back and started watching them. And I got into this. And look, if you haven't watched the show, this will sort of spoil something, but not really. It's a thing that happens in the show, but it's not necessarily a surprise plot line. So at one point, they discover these bodies buried in the ground that have mushrooms growing out of them. It's horrifying. And the first time that me and the missus went to watch the show, I tapped out there because, and I get the concept of being triggered. I think that maybe the word gets used out of context sometimes, or gets used when it's not like what happened. It wasn't necessarily something where you lose control of your emotions and your thoughts, but seeing those corpses with these mushrooms growing out of them for sure triggered me. Since I was a little kid, I've had nightmares about mushrooms growing out of me. I know it's a weird thing, but it's one of the, and maybe not everybody has this, but there are ongoing themes that occupy your nighttime hours. And one of those, for me, has been a very, very vivid dream about finding mushrooms growing out of my arms. And it sounds maybe kind of funny if you're picturing like Super Mario mushrooms or something ridiculous like that. But for me, they were very realistic, like the nasty looking mushrooms you find out in the wild, not these little attractive harvested mushrooms that you find in the grocery store. It's just sitting here thinking about it right now, parts of my anatomy are crumpling and shriveling up. And it's one of those deep bass things, and seeing that that first time, it was too much. I was like, I'm not watching this show. And I don't know if I was necessarily cognizant of that being the trigger at the time. I just knew I didn't want to watch the show. And then, so my wife continued watching it because she doesn't have my weenie mushroom fear, and loves it. It's one of her favorite shows of all time, as it is with many people. And for myself, I love Brian Fuller, and I've been wanting to get back to it. And only once I saw Silence of the Lambs again, I was like, man, I want more of Hannibal Lecter. I want more of this story. I've got to go back and check out and give Hannibal another shot. And I did. I was ready for the mushroom people this time, and they still horrified me, but I got past it. And the acting is phenomenal. Everybody's great. The idea that somebody might be and it's not fair really to compare Mads Mikkelsen to Anthony Hopkins, because they're having very different opportunities to interpret Hannibal Lecter. Anthony Hopkins had a grand total of 6 hours to play Hannibal Lecter, whereas Mads Mikkelsen has already, in the episodes I've watched, surpassed that time, and is playing a much more nuanced version. It's a different thing. You can't compare them. It's not apples and oranges. It's people kidneys and people livers. And you can't compare those two things, as any culinary expert could tell you. So anyway, I'm loving Hannibal. I'm 7 or 8 episodes in right now on Amazon Prime, and it's just fantastic. Last thing I want to put over before we get into the incredible interview, the live, not chaotic, but live and exciting interview with Kirk Thatcher at Dragon Con with a live audience. I want to talk to you about pals at Theme Park Alchemy, making incredible candles, not based on theme park rides, inspired by your favorite theme park rides. Go check out themeparkalchemy.com. They will make your house and your life smell better. So go check that out. And now it is time. And you know what? It occurs to me just now, a Kirk Thatcher candle would not be a bad idea. That guy smelled delightful. Right now, I wish he was sitting right here next to me, just so I could be soothed by his inherent wild and worldly aromas. But anyway, Kirk Thatcher, live from Dragon Con 2018. Enjoy.
Just for the guys in the front row here, you are in the splash zone.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of panel.
You got the memo about bringing ponchos, right?
Yeah.
It's like a Gallagher show.
It's a Gallagher show. But it's not a watermelon.
No.
This guy? Which that guy? Which this guy?
Oh, no. I'm not
Is that it? I mean, no. I mean,
yay!
Is this it? Is how I meant to read that line.
This is it! Woo!
Well, thank you all for showing up. I had a bet with my grandfather that this would be an empty room. He's dead, so I talk to him all the time. Oh, no, he had a good life. As a railroad tie. Steady work. Terrible. It's him.
Should we officially?
He gave me a fireball, and now I'm like, ha!
I did.
Yeah, let's officially start.
I did. It's time to officially start. Is everybody ready to officially start?
Yeah!
I was led to believe that here on the Puppetry Track, there was a need to be loud, which is this. I would like to hear you one more time state that you are ready to start. I like that. That was good.
Such a cheap thing to do.
Oh, cheap. I'm all about cheap. That's all I've
cheap.
got. Look at this suit. Look how cheap this is.
I know. Actually, he wore the suit, so I'd look normal. It's the first time on
true.
a panel I look like, oh, he's just a guy.
That's true. I just want to make Kirk comfortable.
And you did.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, you can't see what's going on under the table.
Both hands
pillow.
on the table.
It's a pillow.
It's comfortable.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
Comfortable.
You're like,
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kirk R. Thatcher panel at Dragon Con.
wow, my people. I'm flattered. Thank you for coming. I hope it's interesting.
That's going to be awesome.
Well, it will. I spent like a day cobbling all these photos and weird videos from my career, and then it's not working. The tech's not working. So I think you're going to get to see that picture of me, and I think 4 behind-the-scenes pictures of Turkey Hollow, And the one thing you're going to see, which is kind of fun, is later on we're talking about the Muppet Hollywood Bowl O2 shows, and you see a little video clip from the O2 show, a Doctor Who clip. So,
which we only found out about, yesterday, I think, that we were going to be able to show it?
Because they asked for it, they asked for it 2-3 days ago, and I said, let me ask Disney, and they said, sure. So, and of course that came through. Everything else I spent my own time on doesn't come through.
Will the internet help?
I don't.
I don't know if you guys. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Disney, but sure is not a word that often enters into their vocabulary.
I pretty much nah, it's not going to happen. And they're like, yeah, why not? I was like, wow. Okay.
So I think we should start with the beginning.
I don't think
right?
We'll just start with the beginning. We're not going to get the pictures, I believe. I mean, unless Ryan yells, I got him! So you tell us.
But if there's anything, because we've spoken before on the Needless Things podcast. All right, thank you.
Oh, that was you!
That was me! But if there's anything that I've learned, it's that painting verbal pictures is something that you're very capable of. So regardless of our AV content, this crowd is going to be amazed.
All right, close your eyes. Come with me and you'll visualize. That's terrible, right? All right, so you guys are puppet enthusiasts, I believe?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. So we were talking beforehand, mainly about Muppet stuff, because before Muppets, technically the puppets I worked on were just a couple on Jedi and Gremlins. And I'm happy to talk about that when we go to Q&A, but we're going to pretty much focus on when I met Jim Henson on, which is 1986 to now, so was that 30 years. And I met him, the thing I really wanted to show you was the two sculpts I did. If you go to my Instagram, it's Kirk Thatcher on Instagram, you can see there's a chameleon and a cockroach character I designed. And they're little maquettes about this big, and I showed them to Jim Henson. Wow, I just got 60 new Instagram followers. And you don't have to follow me, you just look at it. And I showed these to him, and he hired me about a week later. So that's what I want to show, but you're not going to see it. So imagine, if you will, a realistic, weird cockroach. And yeah, you can't do that. It's pretty specific. So I met Jim, and he called about a week later, and my mom answered the phone and heard this funny voice. She's like, hey, hi, there's Kirk there. She's like, oh, it's, she thought a friend of mine was doing Kermit or something, so she played along. Was like, oh, yes, I'll get him right away. And so that was pretty funny. I'm like, Mom, it's Jim Henson. She thought, oh, I thought that was one of your friends doing a funny voice. That's one of my favorite stories about Frank and Jim, is that they both didn't think they did voices. Jim only does 3 voices. He's got, Jim Henson, Kermit the Frog, kind of Ernie, but more excited. And he has Rolf the dog, down here, which is also, 2 or 3 other characters. And Link Hogthrob, kind of the idiot. That's the only 3 voices he really did.
But as kids, we had no idea.
No, I know. But so he kind of was right. He didn't do voices. But Frank Oz, who, if you ever met or heard Frank talk, he talks like this, and he's got that voice. That's how he talks. And he's like, he didn't do. I found out from either Jim or Frank. He said Frank didn't do voices for 8 years. He did right hands and all this because he thought, I can't do a funny voice. It just goes to show you you're never self-aware. So what you think you might not be good at, you actually might be. So ask your friends, but not direct family. Well, it depends on your family. Some people's family like, you suck. But yeah, ask people from high school on, and then if they go, no, you're really good, you do great voices, then probably believe them and go for it, whatever it is. Okay, thanks. That's my inspirational speech.
Solid.
Follow your dreams. So I met Jim and started designing with him on a show that never got made. It was a kids' entertainment thing about these aliens flying around the Earth in a weird spaceship-like balloon. And I designed 3 or 4 aliens, and he was trying to sell it as an educational show that would teach kids about geography and different cultures around the world. Like in this culture, they eat crickets, or they get married when they're 5, or whatever it was. But not judgmental. It was just sort of to open kids' minds. Not everything is the way it is where you live. Right. And so again, very progressive and very Jim. I'm going to teach the world how to love each other. And it didn't sell. I don't even know who they pitched it to. Yeah, that didn't sell in America. What a surprise. It's not a political comment. God, it's a political comment. And then I started working. I moved to New York, and he wanted me to go work on the Jim Henson Hour, which was two halves. How many people have seen any or part of it? If you saw the storyteller, you saw part of it. And the first half was Muppet stuff. So I designed a bunch of characters that became Muppets and only lasted with that show. The only one who lasted, I think, longer at that batch was Clifford. And the idea was, why can't we design a Muppet who has African American or African facial characteristics, but it's not offensive. It's just, like we have a bunch of white guy Muppets, or very, Caucasian. What's wrong with other races? And again, Jim was trying to, be progressive, and so that's where Clifford came from. And he was done by Kevin Clash, who's African American. So we thought, well, if Kevin's okay with it, and he was, and so that's where Clifford was born. He was kind of a catfish human type of thing. But I did a bunch of other characters that, again, Leon the Chameleon, it was just I was reminded of because I put that chameleon sketch up that I'd done earlier. It was more realistic. So I did a bunch of designs and was an idea guy. That was the great thing about Jim. He would just sit with me, like you and I are sitting, but we're probably facing each other more. And he'd go, okay, so we need to come up with an opening for the show. I'm like, okay. I have a griffin. Literally, he'd be like, we have a really neat griffin puppet, and we have a white lion that we made for, and they're all kind of realistic. And he's like, so, come up with some ideas. I'm like, okay, so I just go off and write and draw and storyboard and come back and spill my drink, and I'm not drunk, you are. And that was my job for a year and change, was hanging out with Jim Henson, brainstorming with him, and drawing characters, and then it wasn't my problem. I spent so many time in clubs in Toronto, Canada, because I'd be done at 4 or 5. The creature shop would have to make, or the puppet shop would have to make it. So I was like, I've died and gone to heaven. I get paid to do this. And I was living in Canada, it was Toronto. We were up there, even though I'd moved to New York. I spent probably 9 months of that year in Canada. And then that show did not get picked up, and Jim wanted me to stay, and I'm like, I just don't want to take your money. And again, he was generous. He'd like, no, just stay and we'll, come up with new ideas. I'm like, I didn't love New York. I liked it, but I didn't love living there, especially if I wasn't working on something. So I moved back to LA. I had a little stint on RoboCop 2, started working at Disney Imagineering on a redo of Tomorrowland, and then the ABC deal, the Disney deal was happening. So Jim said, I want to do this. And there was a dinosaur panel, so I'm going to go fast. I want to do a show about dinosaurs and dinosaur thinking, so I started designing dinosaurs with him. And our last meeting, we had 2 meetings in New York, and my last meeting was on a Friday, and he passed away on a Monday night. So it was that fast. And people were like, what did he have? I'm like, I saw him on Friday. We had a 2.5-hour meeting, and he sounded as good as you and I do right now. So that was really shocking for, obviously not me, it's for the entire world. But that was the last project we worked on. And it developed at ABC, and it ran for 4 seasons. And on the last season of Dinosaurs, I started writing on Muppet Treasure Island. Well, what we do, again, the Henson Company maintained sort of the process that Jim had started, which was we'd all come together. And when I say we all, it was Jerry Jewell, who was the head writer on the Muppet Show, won a bunch of Emmys for that. And he's the first person Jim Henson hired as the Muppets was Jerry Jewell, and he was initially a builder, performer, and writer, but he became head writer on the Muppet Show, and that's kind of what his title was. He was the writer. So it would be Jerry Jewell, Bill Prady, who went on to graduate to create The Big Bang Theory. He was part of the team, Michael Frith, and a few other creatives. And we'd brainstorm, and so, again, after Jim had passed away, and we want to do a movie. So they'd done Christmas Carol, which was successful. And I liked it, but I thought it was way too sweet and charming. I'm like, I thought the Muppets were kind of anarchic and funny and crazy. So I was pitching like, let's do Mad Max, let's do, they're like, well, we want to, it's good to do classic literature. So I said, well, like a pirate movie, because it's funny, because Pirates of the Caribbean blew my mind when I was a kid. So I loved pirate movies because of that ride. So I said, let's do a pirate movie with fighting skeletons and all the stuff that ended up being in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. And they said, well, okay, but it's got to be based on something. I said, well, Treasure Island. So I researched it. Treasure Island had been done 13 times when we started writing Muppet Treasure Island. So I said, well, let's do a crazy, it's the Muppets. Nobody's going to be like, that was unrealistic. The pig princess would not have lived in an island because they were on the Tortugas, and that means turtle. No, we didn't have that. So I found that out working on that movie. Tortuga is turtle or tortoise. So we started writing this. I said it started like Treasure Island, the Robert Louis Stevenson book, and by the second half it became a Bob Hope, Bing Crosby road picture, and ended as a Ray Harryhausen Sinbad movie with giant tiki idols chasing him down to the beach and fighting. It had the wild boars, and so Jerry and I would work together. I would lay on his couch. I went up to him. He lived in Mendocino, which is like a little slice of heaven. It's the redwoods meet the ocean. And a beautiful house on the coast. So we'd sit in his office, and I rented an apartment or a little house like up the road. So every day I'd go drive to his house, I'd lay on the couch, and we'd just talk about the movie. And it was his computer, so he would write. And that's sign language for writing on a computer. This would be on your phone. Just make sure you're paying attention. He knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. You're probably a much better thumb typist than QWERTY up, right?
Not really. I'm not really that good.
Good at any typing.
I actually like typing on the keyboard better.
Really? You are a unicorn.
It's more accurate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, good for you. Thanks for ruining my anecdote. So we would write, and we did the first draft, which was this bananas thing, and they liked it, and Disney at the time, and Jeffrey Katzenberg liked it, but they wanted to bring in kind of a script doctor type, a guy named James V. Hart, who was a lovely fellow. We never actually worked with him, but he took the script and he made it more like the book. So all the Banana Pants stuff in there, the Cabin Fever and Polly Lobster and the Clueless Morgan, all that crazy Mr. Bimbo, was all my contribution to the weirdness. So if you see a Muppet thing and it's weird or really silly, that's me, probably. Well, from Jim Henson Hour on. And so we made the movie, and with amazing casting. I really fought for Billy Connolly to be Billy Bones, because I was a huge fan of his humor. If you don't know who he is, a Scottish comic. What was funny was I was such a fan, I would do an impression of him when we were reading the script. You do read-throughs. You do it with the cast. You do it just to pitch it to the executives. So I'd read it like Billy Connolly. I'd do it like that, because that's how he talks. And so some of the puppeteers, because he wasn't really big in the United States, when Billy was hired in England, we was about a month away from filming. Billy came in to do the read-through. We'd cast him, and I was really excited and happy. And so he read it like him, and one of the puppeteers came up to me, one of the main guys, he said, "He sounds just like you." Made me laugh. I said, "No, I sound, yeah." But I won some battles in that with my silliness, because I just think the Muppets, the core should be silly, nice to each other and loving, but that's kind of baked into their character. So I was always fighting for, let's be, my term is Banana Pants, just really silly. And so it was pretty successful. We had an amazing musical writing team, Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil. If you don't know their names, you certainly know their songs. Since the 60s, they were really good friends with Carole King. And there's a play, actually, about Carole King, and they're like the guest stars in it. But they wrote this amazing, and they were not Broadway song show writers. They were pop song show writers, like tons of Lionel Richie, and I think they wrote for the Carpenters, and like good friends with Paul Williams, who wrote Rainbow Connection. And they wrote this hilarious score. And the way we worked them, which I'd never worked with songwriters that closely before, is we'd have the script and we go, okay, like Cabin Fever was a perfect example. Typically in movies, particularly literary ones, the second act can be really boring, like this conversation is right now. And no, it's not boring. Just look at his coat. It's not boring
This is going to hypnotize somebody.
What?
Stop. Yeah. Don't.
So we would have the segment saying, Cabin Fever, they're going bananas because they're in irons, is what you actually call it when you're sailing. There's no wind, so you're just sitting there going nowhere. And the idea was, and it's in the book that they ran into this for like 2 weeks. There was no wind, and they sat there in the middle of the Caribbean, I suppose, or somewhere in the Atlantic, heading towards the Caribbean. And I said, well, there's something called cabin fever, which you get when you're not going anywhere, and you just kind of start hallucinating. So I said, well, let's do a song number. So we gave them some ideas, like, you know, they're not going anywhere, they're afraid they're going to die, and just kind of, not song lyrics even, just ideas to what the song is about. And they came back with that amazing song, and, you know, we were saying they go bananas, and so they actually put that in, you know, we're been a season long, we flipped our bandanas, we're something like bananas. And so they would turn in these amazing songs, which would then inspire us to write stuff in the script to go along with the song, and then Brian, the director, would work with us. So it was a great collaboration. And that's the last Muppet movie I wrote that got made. I've written 2 others since then. I wrote a haunted house movie. I did 4 versions of a haunted house movie, or I should say a Halloween movie with ghosts. There was a Ghostbusters kind of one. There was a haunted house one. There was one where they actually, the Ghostbusters one is the Muppets get killed in the first act. Yes. and the executive's like, you can't do that. I'm like, no, that's the whole thing. That's why we do it, because people are like, what? You killed them? And the whole point of the movie was they had to get back to being alive again because it was a curse. They were crushed by a bookshelf, but it was done by a ghost who was stealing their essence so he could become alive and marry Miss Piggy. He'd fall in love with Miss Piggy, and so
that tracks.
It totally tracks.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because the Disney Haunted Mansion movies stole some ideas. One of the ideas was there was a portrait of this ghost's lovely wife, and it was Miss Piggy. Like, if you've seen her as Pinky and Blue Boy, you've seen her like all done up like a 1820s painting. So that was that in the living room, and so when they see it, they're like, "Oh my God, that looks just like Miss Piggy." And of course, she doesn't see it, but the ghost then kills like Gonzo, Kermit, Fozzie, Bunsen and Beaker or something, and uses their life essence. He doesn't kill them, but he steals their life essence, so essentially they're dead, and they become ghosts. So they have to go to ghost training school and learn how to be. Yeah, it was really silly, and we really loved it. And
thank you for coming here tonight and torturing us with this thing we'll never see.
Yeah, well, that's sad. Actually, you won't, because Disney can't make it, because then they'd have to pay the Henson Company because they spent the money to develop it. And Disney hates spending money on Muppets. When my name's involved, I found out. Anyway, so I did 2 or 3. I did a haunted house one, which is more about there's a video game they made out of the first one we did. I think it's called Muppet Haunted Mansion. Yeah. Okay, so that was based on the plot that the Muppets become classic movie monsters and have to get changed back. So anyway, I did a bunch of stuff that nobody ever saw, and then, but I got paid, and it was fun to do. And I worked on a bad sitcom that I designed the characters for, but wasn't particularly happy. It was called Aliens in the Family. I think they made 5 episodes. And the writers they wanted it to be campy, and I think it killed the humor. And they were just like, "Oh, honey, you crazy alien girl," and it just played like, "Oh, okay, it's all a joke." And then Muppets Tonight happened, which was fun, and Clifford and Pepe was created there, which was one of my favorites. He's so fun to write for because he's a jerk. What's that? Chip. Well, Chip was actually from Muppets.
Oh, you're right.
The Jim Henson Hour. Yeah, no. What's that?
Chip is frightening.
Chip, well, okay, so here's an insight. The Chip was based, he's a parody of Bill Prady. He's a caricature of Bill Prady. Yeah.
His pupils blink.
That was my idea. I said, I know, but I said we have these puppets that, their eyes don't do anything, and we didn't want to get into the big IMAX, but what if they blink, like, I thought of Chuck Jones characters, where they have little beady eyes, and they go, blink, blink. Yeah. So that's when I was still designing, I'm like, let's make these little clicky eyes, so he has that weird, like, stare that never goes away.
So it's a physical mechanism?
It's actually, it's a smaller ball and a bigger ball, and it just clicks down. It's got the black on it normally, and it just clicks onto white, so it just looks like his eyes disappear for a second. That's not creepy. I don't know why you guys think that's creepy. I'm just kind of giving you the briefer timeline. The Muppets Tonight, which was fun. Every time a Muppet Show goes on the air, the network executive changes hands and they kill it. So that happened there. Jamie Tarsis took over after 10 episodes aired, and she brought Dick Blasucci, who was the showrunner, and I in, and said, "We like the show, it's fun, but how are you going to get males 18 to 35? And I said, "Straight males?" I'm like, "Yes." I said, "That's the toughest audience for us. They want to watch football, drink beer, and sports cars. Like, the Muppets is not their thing." Like, it was hilarious. We do these test groups. We bring in like a group like this, maybe about half the room, and it'd be a little bit of everybody, and everyone would give us high numbers except for straight men 18 to 35. They're just like, it's for kids. They just, whatever, didn't like it. So we tried to dance around and say, we have Michelle Pfeiffer, we have Heather Lock, we have cute women guests, and we make funny jokes. And anyway, they killed it. They didn't even run the second season. Ended up on the Disney Channel, but we won Emmys for Best Kids Show, which was kind of great and also a little hurt a little bit because we didn't write it as a kid show. But even the Muppet Show originally was considered a kid show by most people. And then I started doing the TV movies. So don't throw tomatoes, because I didn't write them. I did Very Merry Muppet Christmas, and 3 years later, Muppets Wizard of Oz, which there's casting issues. Did not want the person who played Dorothy she's a lovely person, but wasn't really ready to do that job as an actress, but that the network wanted her. So directed those, and then did Muppets Letters to Santa, which was written by Paul Williams. The original line was Paul Williams, who wrote Rainbow Connection and a bunch of Carpenter's hits. And he's a friend of the Muppets. And so he came in with this idea, and they hired 2 writers, and we made that. That was a 60-minute, just an hour-long special for TV. And so the TV budgets are, let's put it this way, for what they made the first new Muppet movie, was it just called The Muppets? Or yeah. Here Come the Muppets, I called it. So we could have made 6 TV specials for what they made that one movie for. My budget started, the first one was 10, then it went to 8, then it went to 6, and then it went to 3. So they just kept getting smaller and smaller, but still it was 90 minutes usually, except for the last one. So it was tough, and people criticize it, and I get it. They're not high art, but we had really tight schedules and budgets. Which you can't put at the beginning of the film. This is a TV movie, okay? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they don't let you do that. What's that? You want to join us? Come up here, sassy fans. Of course, it's the redhead. Yeah.
No, actually, she's not allowed on anything that I'm recording.
Let's not air dirty laundry. Let's just take off our dirty laundry. And then it got weird.
Gotta get it dirty first.
Yeah. Oh, wow. See, you make me look normal. Thank you.
That's what I'm here for.
So that pretty much brings us up to the late 2000s, and I started doing all the viral videos. They'd liked them to be viral, but the one that really won the internet was Bohemian Rhapsody. And we shot that one day, which you've seen it. Again, I brought this stuff, but it's not being able to download, but you can see it on YouTube. I think we're up to 55 million views, which for a Muppet thing is pretty good. And did a bunch of silly ones. Stand By Me, which is one of my favorites. Big Mean Carl eating bunnies. Yeah, that to me, that was my idea for a song, and I love Big Mean Carl because he's a one-note character. Hi, I'm Carl, and he eats you. Real easy to write for. I guess I'm just lazy. I guess I am lazy. And then the Creature Shop Challenge happened, which was really fun. I was telling someone today it was the best job I ever had because I came in for 1 day a week for about 12 hours, a long day, and gave my opinion, and people listened to me, and then I went home and got a check. I told Brian, I said, wow, now I know what it's like to be you. Not as a director, as a producer. I was teasing him, of course, but it was a great job, because the people were so talented, and impossible tasks they gave them. You have 2 days to build an entire creature suit, and you're going to team you up with someone who hates you. Well, you saw it if you did see it.
Yeah.
There was not, and there's really only that one. I hate to call them a couple, but they just were not a good mix, and I think the producers knew that, and so they would pair them up. That show, people asked if it was scripted or designed at all. It was not. It was literally they were so, because I guess there's big lawsuits that could happen. They were so meticulous about it when we were filming and we break for lunch, they would put up a wall of just black duvetine, black cloth, to walk the contestants out so they couldn't make eye contact with us to wink at us and make us fall in love with them. I don't know what they were worried about. No, it was really weird. And one time we were eating lunch just out in the outdoor kind of dining area because it's LA and you can eat outdoors all the time. And they were walking them to wherever, their lunch area. And they said, okay, judges, please look over there. Look over there. We're like, whoa, what's going on? Don't look. And they were walking them to a bus or something. It was really bizarre. But so there was no shenanigans in that way, because people have asked me that. Oh, it's a reality show. That was pretty real. And that brings us up to about 3 years ago. And then I did Turkey Hollow 3 years ago. I have some pictures. Can we show the Turkey Hollow stuff? I think there's 5 behind-the-scenes photos. There it is. So, okay, they're not in order. This is the Puppeteers. This is a joking. See, look what an easy job it is. Go to the next. Well, if you could just scroll through the pictures. And it was an easy job because... Oh, there you go. Fancy. Because I buried them alive. We literally, those boards, there were 3 more boards that went over them, and we covered them with a tarp and covered it with dirt, and those 4 holes there where their arms came out, they were underground for about 45 minutes to an hour we had a little kind of gap off camera shot. If you've seen the movie, it's when the 4 creatures are eating the wall, eating away the rocks that the building they were trying to get into was made of, because they eat rocks. And so those guys had dust masks on, That's a wider shot, and I think that's it. I don't think there's a shot because the video clip, and there's Mary Steenburgen and I with the creatures. If you hadn't seen it, so that was based on an outline that Jim had written in 1967 or 68 with Jerry Jewell to do a hour-long TV special, and it was the first time they were going to use creatures made of fur with glass eyes. So it was like dark. It wasn't like bright green and yellow and like Sesame Street. It was going to be more realistic. So we took that idea and made them kind of contemporary Creature Shop realistic, not 1968 Muppets realistic. And it was fun. It was sweet. It was for the Lifetime channel, which is not a comedy network. And they don't think of themselves as a comedy network, but they said, well, we hired you to, because we wanted to be funny. And then they killed comedy. It was nothing inappropriate. It wasn't, my normal sensibilities. It wasn't even silly. They just wanted it to be more heartwarming. So again, I'm not, I'm proud of it for what it was, but it was fun to do, and Mary Steenburgen was delightful. She's the reason it got made. She loved Jim Henson and loved the Muppets, and so she was very excited to work on it. And after that was the Hollywood Bowl, which was last year, and there's one clip I have. I'll set it up first. So the Hollywood Bowl is a live show. It was basically what the Muppets would be like if you went and saw the Muppet Show live, and we weren't trying to hide the puppeteers. So yeah, don't play the clip yet. And so we did it last summer, and our guest host was Bobby Moynihan, who's delightful from SNL. He's a human Muppet and has become a very good friend. And it got great reviews. In fact, I was told we did a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday show. By Saturday afternoon, Debbie, who runs the Muppets at Disney, had gotten 2 or 3 calls from the O2, Radio City Music Hall, and some other big venue about when can we get the show. So, which was great and really heartwarming. The thing is, it's not this is the business side of things, which maybe you don't care about, but if you run a show for 3 nights that size with that big, when we went to London, we flew out 68 people. It just doesn't make money unless you run it for like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, where it's the same thing. But we had to put all these people up because half the crew was from in London. Everyone was not from London, but it's an expensive show to do, and I was told they lost money on it. But it was a great kind of welcoming back of what I consider the Muppets. And it wasn't. I don't want to sound snarky, so I'm going to take a drink.
That's not going to help.
Shut up! Oh my God. No, the people who wrote the Muppets, the new sitcom, lovely people. Bill Prady was a friend, but they were sitcom writers. They weren't Muppet writers. It's an odd job writing for the Muppets. It's sort of like herding cattle is not the same as raising crickets.
Right. Which is this.
Exactly. Cattle are big, easy to move. Crickets go bananas and go everywhere. But the way networks, this is again probably more than you care to know, but networks think in terms of, they wrote a funny show, they wrote New Girl, they wrote, whatever the last 3 hit sitcoms were, we'll have them write for the Muppets. But it's a very specific, writing for puppets is a very specific kind of comedy. Part of it is very physical, and part of it, when you read it, doesn't read funny. One of the examples, because I just remember, because I was told by Frank Oz that's not funny, and then he did it because he didn't tank the read, was Mr. Bimbo. And again, this is just my personal experience, but it's happened to every writer. But with Mr. Bimbo in Muppet Treasure Island, he's the little man that lives in his finger. And the idea was that Fozzie was kind of a soft-headed rich kid who didn't really deal with reality because his daddy was rich. So he had his little friend because he was a lonely child. We had a whole backstory as why he had a little man who lived in his finger. But Frank read it and goes, so he's crazy. We're like, yeah, he's crazy. He's a trust fund kid who doesn't deal with reality. So his best friend is he spent a lot of hours by himself. His man, Mr. Bimbo, lives in his finger. And Frank read it, and it got huge laughs. He goes, all right, well, got a laugh, so we'll keep it. But that's what I mean. It's very specific. Even Frank Oz, who hates lots of dialogue, like his first thing, when Frank reads a script, he's like, too many words. Just starts crossing out dialogue. Dialogue you've spent months on. So the new Muppet Show was very, very dialogue-y, and it was written for, like the cast of New Girl or The Office. Or yeah, it very much was like The Office. And that's not to say it wasn't funny, it just doesn't work with the Muppets, particularly what people were expecting. So what we did with the Hollywood Bowl show was to say, let's just go back. So it was Jim Lewis and I, who are the last two surviving Muppet writers who worked with Jim Henson. And two guys with this company, Soapbox, who does all our viral videos. They're a great small production company in LA. Andrew Williams, who's their vice president. I think, he's the vice president of like creative affairs, and he's a writer and a director also. And then Matthew Barnett, who's their kind of staff writer. So the four of us wrote it, and Jim and I kind of wrote herd on it and said we wanted it to be like the Muppet Show, like really silly and kind of daffy and showing off the characters what they do well. And the audiences went nuts. Like, the Muppets are back. For every job I worked on, they say, the Muppets are back. And so they loved it so much that they've now hired sitcom writers to write a new Muppet Show. I'm not bitter. I'm not... Oh, wait. No. And so then they loved it, and we got to do the O2. And what's different, people ask, it was the same show. It was the same structure, but a number of things we made different to appeal to the British audience, and one of it was, instead of a Star Trek kind of Star Wars parody with pigs in space, we did a Doctor Who parody. And Bo Brown, who runs the Puppet, or one of the Puppet Track people on this, asked if we could show, I don't know who requested it, the clip of the Muppets.
It was Bo.
It was Bo.
Yeah, it was
okay,
Bo.
I thought it was Bo, but the regenerating into every iteration of Doctor Who. So that's the clip I have. I don't know if there's audio with it. There should be, but
Do we want to bring the lights down a little bit before we run it?
it's like a 30-second clip, so don't get too excited.
We're gonna build it. We're gonna build this.
Yes.
Okay.
In a time, in a world. 3, 2, 1. So that's Link is Link, and then he's in the regeneration chamber. There's some good casting, I thought.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not supposed to stop there.
You sure?
I'm positive. I saw it 3 times in London. This did not happen. You have, I think, 3 more doctors. Here we go. Oh my God. Oh. It's not Disney.
This clip really likes Uncle Deadly.
Yeah. Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Now you can have Mr. Piggy.
Kick it. Just kick it. Wait for it. Wait for it.
But the sound
Kirk's
effect
did.
Yes.
This is a
All
nice
right. Well,
sound effect.
it's a great sound
Really
effect.
good.
What it ends up is yes, Miss Piggy is the last one, because with the short hair, who's playing the new doctor, and she looks at herself and she goes like, "Oh, what's her first line?" The actual doctor, she's like, "Brilliant." That's it. So Miss Piggy goes, "Brilliant," and then disappears back on set, and so the puppet pops up with this new short wig, but it's Link. So Link is now the new doctor, and Piggy's there, and Piggy goes, "Oh, I like her," and then Strange Pork is like, "Which one of you wants to go out with me?" And then we end the show, or end the sketch. So it was silly, and it was a lot of fun, and we had 2 of the Doctor Who's on as part of the show. We had Dave Tennant and Peter Davidson. Yes, thank you. And they were great and had a blast. So that brings us up pretty much to now, and now we can talk about anything you want to ask, or we'll go to questions.
I actually was wondering about design a little bit, because you were talking about designing characters, but when you're coming up with that, obviously the physical reality of a puppet has to enter into it. So when you get a great idea, but then you start looking at it and you think, well, we have to actually make these eyes work. We have to make this mouth work. Like, how does that process go?
Well, I learned from a guy I knew who was talking about, Jim Henson. When I started designing for him, again, if I had these drawings, you could see something, but that wasn't snarky. I was just saying, for example. Jim said he would say that's a great design, but it's not a good puppet or good hand puppet. He said it's basically this dimension here. You can't really change. You can make it longer. You could have like an alligator, but if you draw something with a huge jaw, it just gets lost. So it's just the mechanics. It's like designing a car. You can't put the wheel wells too short. The wheels can't make a hard turn. So it's kind of, once you realize what the limitations are, or what the issues are, they're not necessarily limitations, you design accordingly. So the first year I was working with him, he would kind of, gently guide me and say, "That's great, but maybe make the jaw smaller or the eyes farther apart." So that's one thing for puppets and hand puppets in particular. Like creatures, you have a lot more leeway now. But what I always tried to do, and I think what Jim liked about my designs, was I put character in the design. You basically learn that in animation. If any of you have done animation design, like you always talk about the silhouette. Like the silhouette, you should read, oh, that's an angry penguin or a fat alligator, just in a black, literally like a cutout silhouette. So I tried to do the same thing with a puppet. It's not as animated, to use an expression, but it's if he's an angry character, or he's, characters from dinosaurs. I mean, the baby was kind of impish, so he had this big eyes and this little, kind of cute little mouth. He looked like me, thank you. Really? I've not gotten that. Lou Albano I've gotten twice today.
This is a wrestling heavy year.
Yeah, crazy. So that's what I would always approach, is like, what is the character first, not what's the design. And I see a lot, and this is just me on a soapbox, a lot with ZBrush now, particular CG design. People go bananas on the details, and you can sculpt, that you can zoom in on the pores, and you see these amazing designs, but they're either incredibly busy, like, I don't know where to look. It looks like one of the examples of the Transformers, the new Transformers movies. I mean, they're just so detailed. And it's amazing, and it's, computer guys going, look what I can do, and it technically amazing, but you kind of get lost in it.
You don't know who's who, they all look the same.
Yeah, exactly. And Jim talked about that. He said one of the problems with Fraggle Rock, I mentioned earlier in the panel, I think on Dinosaurs, was that their mistake was making them all the same, essentially, except, like, she's got yellow pom-poms and he's got red. So that was one of the things, because he had just finished kind of creating Fraggle Rock when I started with him. It was like 86, 87. And so we talked about colors, and that's why the dinosaurs, somebody asked today, why are they all different? I said, because you would be able to tell them apart even in a silhouette. Like, that's Robbie, that's Charlene, that's the dad, that's the mom. So specifically with puppets, those are the two things. What is the character? Because, like Pepe the Prawn, if you look at him... King Prawn, okay. If you look at him, he's not angry, but he's got this pugnacious, this is the word I would use, lower lip. He looks like that. So he always looks like he's ready for a fight. And it's subtle, and he's got those beady eyes. So you already know a guy like then what's funny is you play against that. Like, he thinks he's a great lover, or he's an amazing artist. But he's, blessed with that face. So sometimes you play against type, you don't want if you kind of do it, what I like to say, too on the nose, then it gets boring, or maybe you don't know. You asked. So does that answer your question in the design process?
Yeah, well, and also, did you get to a point where elements that wouldn't necessarily work in a physical puppet just kind of didn't show up anymore? Like, you just sort of knew...
Oh, as for me as a designer?
Yeah.
It was mainly the jaw thing and eye spacing were the two things. And then part of the design... Can you hear me? Is that... Okay. Part of the design process is live hands, like Bunsen and Beaker both have live hands, where it's a second performer, the Swedish chef. Kermit, Gonzo, Piggy all have rod arms. You guys, Puppet Track, assume you know what I mean. So that's part of it. Is it going to be live hand? Does it have to do, like Bunsen, Beaker, a chef? They're going to do a lot of hand gags. So it's really important for them to have live hands.
Right.
Piggy just basically minces around and goes like this. So she doesn't, she holds a feather boa or a glass of champagne. So she doesn't need that manipulability. Okay, just
one more.
She's got to finish it. And just say, she can't move her hands a lot. So yeah, that's part of the process of And what's funny is it translates over into writing. I think all the arts have a core process, at least the way I approach them is you start rough and you refine and you refine and you refine. And that's with an idea for a movie or a book or a sculpture. You start sculpture and painting. I was trained as a painter originally.
Really?
Yeah, I took Sunday classes with my dad's secretary, who was an oil painting teacher. I was not formally trained in anything except being an idiot. And I was self-taught by that. The biggest idiot I know. And Monty Python and Steve Martin. Yeah, those were my touchstones. And so the Muppets were kind of like, to me, the Muppets were Monty Python with puppetry. And that's how I've always felt. People are like, oh, it's a kid show. I'm like, no, it's Monty Python was my favorite show when I was 10 to 14. Yeah. But it wasn't a kid's show. So that's how I always think of puppets, but particularly the Muppets. What the hell was I talking about?
We started with design.
But we were the writing. I was saying that all the arts kind of relate to each other. So even with writing, you have to know what a puppet can do. Like the first thing when we get a new writer who's, the studio or whoever, the network likes them and say, oh, you're going to write a Muppet script. And they go, Miss Piggy bats her eyelashes as she walks up the stairs. And you're like, okay, that's a day shoot right there. Because she doesn't have eyelashes that move. And they're like, what? Doesn't she go, ah? I'm like, no, she goes, that's all she can do. It's a really good performer, as you guys probably know as puppeteers. A lot of you can get. I mean, Frank Oz is literally like a piano master with his hand. People think she winks and she blinks and flutters her eyes. She doesn't do any of that. She's literally that's her face. On a good day. Don't tell her I said that. What you're writing that and then walking up and down stairs is just it's really a whole rig. You have to build the set right. So we'll talk to new writers sometimes, say, can she just already be in the room at the bottom of the stair, like just take one last step and then walk across the room, and instead of flooding her eyelids, can she kind of wave them on, whatever. And very often they balk, saying, well, isn't that up to the performer? It's like, yeah, it is. So don't put it in the script as a script point. So again, and that was the problem a lot with the new shows. The writers were just sitcom writers, so they would write things that weren't necessarily, and they weren't bad for puppets, they just don't do it very well. Like sitting and doing a lot of dialogue, just puppets talking. Frank Oz said this like the second time I met him when I was a writer. He said puppets talking, doing pages of dialogue is the most boring. See, it's the most boring thing in the world. I'm just boring you talking about puppets talking. So that's, I think, if any of you are writing puppet scripts, keep it physical, keep it moving. I mean, again, you want to do drama. I'm talking about comedy, I guess. People do lovely dramas with puppets too. It's just not the world I work in. These guys, you were talking Bunraku in Japan. Like some of you guys are so deep into the art of puppetry. I'm really impressed by that. And Jim was a huge fan. He supported all these different puppetry art festivals, and he took me to a couple. Julie Taymor, you guys probably know.
Yeah.
We saw her when she was just doing weird Broadway plays way before Lion King, doing weird like Latin American tales of a boy who turned into a jaguar, Juan Darien, and it was amazing and just there wasn't a comedy at all. There was nothing funny in it. But he loved just puppetry all over the fact it wasn't just kids shows and Muppets. But yeah, it's a very specific craft, as you guys mostly know, and it requires specific techniques for writing and performing and building and designing.
As far as just entertaining goes, what are some lessons that you learned from Jim Henson? I mean, because the technical stuff, the puppetry and design and everything is...
Well, there's the spectacle of puppetry. And Brian talked a little bit about this today. He said what's fun about puppets is that they're doing this in the real world and you're in on the joke. Like Phenomena, to me, is just a classic example of... It's probably the most famous Muppet thing that anyone who doesn't even speak English would know, because it's literally this. It's far and away. It's Grover from Sesame Street going, close, far, but with a catchy song. And that's when I was saying earlier about the physicality of puppets doing just dumb things that either, riding a bike blew people away in 1980 and then they doubled down and Take Manhattan. It was like 6 minutes of Muppets riding bikes. So there's a spectacle to it, but you're in on the joke. You're knowing, they can't do that, and then how do they do that? And it takes you, in some ways, out of the movie. But I was told by a guy who works at Pixar, they call that fun and games. Just the joy of animation, the joy of a crazy chase scene, the joy of whatever. It has to feed the story and the plot, but it's the fun of the medium. In animation, it could be people blowing up and doing that with Muppets. It could be people being thrown across the room. Even dinosaurs, we would throw the baby across the room, or he'd bite tails, or Roy Hess with his tiny little arms. It's just funny because it looks funny, and it's not like we're not doing Ibsen plays. We're just doing. But again, you have to have that mindset. It isn't. And a friend of mine, David Silverman, is one of the main guys who made The Simpsons an animated series, and he would talk, because all those writers are sitcom, like dialogue writers, and they would just write basically radio plays. And so David, what he really brought to it, and I think gets some credit, but probably not as much, is he made it visually funny. Like Bart getting choked when his tongue's over here and his eyeballs are crossed over here and his head's bent like a U shape, going, that's David. It wasn't, and the writers didn't write that. Wow. So animation is very similar. There's a physicality to it, a visual aspect, and with the puppets you get the double whammy of people know that that's real. It's not CG. It's not, it's like magic on TV is not that interesting because you're like, well, yeah, it's on TV. You can make an elephant disappear. I can see Godzilla walk over the building. So magic works live. I mean, really to impress you. If I were here and suddenly he disappeared and, I lift up the table and you're like, that's amazing. But if we did it on TV, they're like, oh, you just stop tape or you whatever. You had a blue screen in front of them. So I think it's that part of the spectacle of puppetry that is inherent in the creation of it and why people laugh at things that aren't, again, on the page. Well, again, talking things I did, Muppet Treasure Island, when Billy Bones grabs Gonzo's nose, or Gonzo, what is it? He says, Jimmy, Jim, 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 and grabs Gonzo's nose. And Gonzo goes, I'm not Jimmy Jim, because his nose being, I'm not Jimmy Jim Jim, he's Jimmy Jim 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 Jim. And then Billy turns to the boy and grabs him and goes, Jimmy Jim Jim Jim. And it's stupid, and and people are like, that's not funny. I'm like, just let Billy Connolly say it, let Gonzo say it. These are funny people, and it was funny. And I don't know why, it's just funny to me, so I go, well, it made me laugh. But, that's every comedy writer's defense. It made me laugh. But there's a certain non-cynical aspect, kind of the joy of existence, the joy of movement that puppets have, or the Muppets have. And not, the Muppets are their own thing, not to say all puppets, it's joy of movement. But I think there's an underlying pleasure you get out of that. Seeing Kermit go, I mean, that's not funny. If I write, a frog waves his arms and says, yay, you're like, oh my God, that's hilarious. And so that is a big problem. You write them up a puppet script or a Muppet script, and people are like, it's not really that funny. I'm like, you visualize it. Because I start as a painter. I'm very visual when I write. So it's a help in my case.
We're fascinated by the illusion of life.
Yes.
Like, I think that's something humanity-wise, we're all very compelled by that, and puppetry captures that in a way that nothing else does.
Yeah.
So in Kermit, yes, it's a pile of green felt, but when we see that motion, you're not thinking about the guy making it happen. You want this character to be doing the thing that he's doing.
Well, I've got a great story about how successful it is. So Snoop Dogg was a guest star, and everyone's like, Snoop, where's this going? Was a guest star in the first Muppet movie I directed, Very Merry Muppet Christmas Movie. And he was just going to show up at the stage and hang out like he knew the guys in the band, and then suddenly we're going to cut back to him. It was going to be all smoky, and it was funny.
But why?
Why? Well, because Snoop enjoys smoking. Anyway, it's legal now, so it's okay. Not here? Okay, well, he's not here. So, but we were warned, Snoop comes with a posse of 8 to 10 guys.
Sure.
And he literally did. He had a guy named Bishop Don who was all decked out in green with emeralds in his teeth. He was a pimp, a pimp preacher. Yeah, the cup. He signed a book to me. He brought his autobiography, Bishop Don, and he signed it to Muppet director in Vancouver, Bishop Don. He was sitting behind me. My name is on the back of my chair. Kirk Thatcher, director. Yeah. Anyway, so Snoop shows up, and he's really cool. I got to kind of act this out. So he walks in, and Steve Whitmire was doing Kermit at the time, and had it like this. Snoop walks in, we're like, hey Snoop, so here's the scene, and here's Kermit, and Steve just raises up Kermit and goes, oh hey Snoop, and Snoop walks in with his guys, and he's like, oh hey man, yeah, it's nice, he's very cool, not egotistical, but just very laid back and cool. So Kermit pops up and says hi, and Snoop goes, oh man, oh, Dad, Kermit, oh dude, and he lost his shiz, as he would call it. He was literally 9 years old, and he said, I've been watching you since I was 9 years old, and he just was giggling and crying. He literally buckled. I'm not exaggerating. That's probably even not as strong. And it was so charming. And Steve Whitmire's standing right next to him. It's if I had Kermit right here and you started crying and wet your pants.
I would, though.
Yeah.
I would.
Well, and again, Kermit was iconic at this point. It was the year 2002. But the power of, like you said, a bag of felt with 2 ping pong balls on it, because of the performance and the personality behind it. And Snoop was probably high as a kite, so he lost any filters he might have had. And we shot the scene, and it was great, and it was funny, and it was, again, like, the kids would just be like, oh, that's smoky, because no one was ever smoking anything. And he was riffing with the band, and I don't know, there's some innuendo jokes about the use of certain herbs. And we shot it, but the main problem was, and then it got cut out, but people said, oh, it's because he was Snoop Dogg, or the Muppets chickened out. It's like, no, the script was 120 pages, and it was only supposed to be an 88-minute movie. So I had to cut 42 minutes out of it. And his scene was just a fun scene, so it had to go. But then we found out that he was producing porn under his own label. So we would have had to cut it anyway.
Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, so
I don't understand why anybody would be particular about such a thing.
I know. Well, nowadays, anything goes. But back then, in the old days, but to prove the point of the coolest person we've ever worked with, who you would not think would lose it over seeing Kermit, particularly with the performers standing right next to him. But it's so powerful. The other story that Jim told me was he was one of the first times he was on Carson, and he wasn't hiding behind the couch. He was sitting there, and he just had Kermit. He's like, "Oh, Johnny," and then Johnny would talk to him and laugh. And so they went to the commercial break, and the producer Freddie Cordova came over and said, "Jim, when you're doing Kermit, could you speak up a little bit?" And Jim's like, "Well, it's the same voice I'm using right now. I don't change my voice." He goes, "Yeah, but when Kermit's talking, for some reason the voice drops down." And Jim's like, "Well, okay, I'm not sure why, because I really am just like, I'm not doing a ventriloquist act. I'm just talking and like, oh, yeah, And so they came back from commercial, and they start rolling, and Jim's like looking around saying, and he noticed that this is the old days of TV where the boom mic was on a little gimbal, and the boom operator just worked two pulleys, and so he was booming Kermit. He was boom micing Jim's hand. So he went from like, well, that's right, Johnny, what does Kermit think? So Jim had a laugh, and the boom guy was mortified. He was so embarrassed. But again, this is a hardened Hollywood veteran who just, the reality is, oh, the frog's talking, the man's talking.
That's beautiful.
So, and you see it with kids all the time, but it's great when it happens with adults, And it is the power of those characters and puppetry.
Well, to wrap up.
What?
I know. You're a man who...
Well, that's debatable.
You followed your dreams, and in the short time that I've known you're an inspiration.
Oh, thank you. I've been, like I said, I'm very lucky. Timing and not a social life until I was 21. I spent a lot of time in my garage making puppets and monsters and movies. Are there any questions burning? I mean, we don't have much time, I guess.
In the back with the sunglasses.
In 1986, you portrayed a character called Punk Rock Guy on the Rise.
Yes.
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 That character you reprised in a movie called Spider-Man Homecoming.
I did.
How did that come about, and will Punk Rock Guy on the Rise be appearing in Spider-Man Far From Home?
Or in a DC movie. I want to get in every universe. That's all because Kevin Feige, when I met him at Comic-Con 3 years ago, was introduced by a mutual friend, and I thought my friend was having me on because I went to the Marvel after party. It was a small event, maybe 30 people. So my buddy brings us in. It was with Dave Silverman, the Simpsons director. And he goes, "This is David Silverman." The director is like, "Hey, Dave." And then he says, "This is Kirk Thatcher from the Muppets." And, like that. But Kevin Feige stands up, beelines right towards me. He goes, "Wait, are you the Kirk Thatcher?" And I was like, "Well, yeah. Well, I get, yeah." And he goes, "Wait, Kirk Thatcher from Star Trek 4 is the associate producer, wrote I Hate You and sang it?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he puts out his hand. He goes, "You're the reason I got into the film business." And I'm like, so my friend is standing right there. I'm like, I'm literally thinking, "Where's the like? Come on, you're punking." I literally think I said, "You're punking me." And he was dead serious. He's like, "No, I was 13 years old. I saw Star Trek 4. I saw your name in the credits doing all this cool stuff." He said, "I want to do that. I want to be a producer." It was such a weird job. I was associate producer on it. But so it happened. That's the long version. It was Kevin. I was in a meeting pitching to direct a Marvel movie with them. And he said he was late for the meeting and had to leave early because he was catching a plane to New York. I said, "Oh, I'm going to New York on Friday." He goes, "Wait, you're going to be in New York this weekend?" I'm like, "Yeah." He said, "We're shooting the last few scenes of Spider-Man. You should be in the movie. You should be the punk. You're the punk on the street." And I'm like, "What?" He's like, "You talk to the producers." He's a classic guy who runs the studio. He's like, "Yeah, they'll make it happen." And he leaves. So I get a call the next day. I had to move my flight from Friday morning to Thursday night. And this all happened in 3 days. So the next day, the producer called me and said, well, we got a ticket for you. Oh, no, they didn't have a ticket for me. We have a time for you to show up on set Friday morning. It's 4:30 in the morning. So I literally flew in, got into JFK at like 12:30 at night, put my stuff in my hotel room, slept for 2 hours, showed up on set, and I brought my own clothes because it was basically like a homeless... The idea was, as a punk 35 years later, who is now a homeless crazy person in New York with the boombox yelling at Spider-Man. So that was all because the head of the company got his wish and crammed me in a movie 3 days after he thought of it in the room. So, yeah, I had a weird career. And I've made, I think, $700 off that little cameo. Yeah, and bought me a couple drinks tonight.
And a nice hat.
And a lovely hat, yeah. Oh, there was, you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question. So dinosaurs, and this may have been answered earlier, but I was in an earlier panel. Dinosaurs got ended and then got continued, right?
No,
because
it just
there
ended.
was the ending with, like, the world ending.
Yeah, the snow falling. It didn't really, world didn't end, but the snowfall.
Right. So I guess what happened with a continuation ending, or what do you know about what happened?
There's nothing happened. That was it.
So like the world ended, and like all the power went out and stayed out.
Right, and they were snowing outside, and Earl says, well, I've been around for millions of years, and I'm sure...
And then they rewrote a few weeks later, right?
Nope.
Okay.
Can you imagine that as a child?
Oh my gosh, it's the Mandela effect.
You couldn't handle the trauma. A lot of people are like, I made up a story in my mind, like that they got warm and they married mammals and lived on. You had a question.
Do you know if there's been any talk about putting some of those, like the Hollywood Bowl or the O2 show, out on discs?
Yeah, there's been a lot of requests. It's a money issue. Every song we do, so here's the thing I learned on this, because I asked that, the first one, like, are we going to put this out on DVD? They said every time you perform a song in a venue, like the Hollywood Bowl or anything, they pay a yearly fee to ASCAP and BMI that covers any song played. So the musicians who perform it just get a residual check from the live venues. I never get one, but my songs are all in movies. So if we put it to DVD, that would be a secondary rights thing, and we'd suddenly have to buy the rights for those songs for DVD, and they know it's the Muppets and they know it's Disney, so they're not like, oh, I'll give it to you for a buck. It's, So suddenly the show, which we lost money on, I was told anyway, I mean, it wasn't a huge money loss, but would suddenly be like a $10-15 million show. That no one wouldn't see it. It's just then we could sell the DVDs, and probably they did the math and went, we're not going to sell $15 million worth of DVDs for the show. So that's why I was saying earlier, it only works if you do a number of shows. So people have asked, are you going to do that every year or something? It's not up to me. I'm the last person they call, so I don't know, but I doubt it because it doesn't make any money. Yes?
Your sketches that you do for designing different creatures or
Mm-hmm.
Muppets and stuff, what ends up happening to those? Does it end?
I keep most of them now, but the stuff that was done for dinosaurs, the Henson family owns. They just archive it. Like, when you work for Lucasfilm, they own the maquettes I did for Jedi, and I guess, Warner Brothers owns storyboards I did for Gremlins, stuff like that. But
So do you ever do commissions or sell art or anything?
I do. I don't do it so much anymore because I've kind of been out of it more as a writer-director. But, not a lot of people are calling me going, can I buy a drawing? But, if you want one, we can talk about it. But it's not cheap.
Kirk.
Or you can make me buy. Wait, one more question, then we'll go.
One more question.
Well, is there another thing in here after this?
Yeah, they're
Well,
gonna.
screw them. No.
The giant hook is gonna come out.
All right. One last question because she looks so sad.
Oh.
I was just wondering about all those.
Better be a good question.
Snippets from the movies that didn't get released.
Oh, the outtakes?
Yeah, the outtakes or the Snoop Dogg, scenes and everything. Is there any way to sneak that online? Or
I would get so in trouble. Come buy me a bottle of bourbon and come over to my house and we can screen it on the DVD thing.
But not Fireball. Don't give him Fireball.
No, there's no. I mean, a lot of times it's because they screw up and swear, or it's not. A lot of them are just line flubs and they go, I messed up here. It's not hilarious, but the ones you see are the ones that we've approved or allowed to be shown. Usually at the end of on the DVDs, the extra material, special edition stuff. Yeah.
no Snoop Dogg? No Snoop Dogg?
I have that. I have Quentin Tarantino swearing a blue streak for his cameo, and we have to go.
What does the R stand for?
Oh.
Really? And that's our show! Thank you. If you have burning questions, I'll stand outside and answer them for a couple minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kirk R. Thatcher!
Thank you. You made me very proud and happy.
I keep leaning towards the mic as though it's working. I find that amusing. You all know what the Dragon Con app is. Go in the Dragon Con app, give this panel 5 stars, and next year we can have guests
big ballroom.
almost as good as Kirk. Almost as good.
But
We'll never get anybody as good.
Yeah.
That was such an awesome time. It's funny. Obviously, I want every panel I do at Dragon Con to be as good as it can possibly be, but it's almost hard when they're really good and really fun, and I get along well with whoever it is, because then there's sort of a like, man, how will it always be that good? Can it always be that good? And so far, fortunately, the answer has been yes. From Kane to Kirk Thatcher to Ric Flair and Sting to Ricky the Dragon Steamboat to Tim Clark. I've just been very lucky to William Stout. Just great times, wonderful, generous people, and it's the magic of Dragon Con. So there you go. I hope you guys enjoyed the second part of the Kirk Thatcher panel. I will be contacting him soonish to see if he wants to come on and do another Skype conversation just to see what he's up to and maybe fill out some more stories. That guy, he warned me before the first episode we could just sit here and talk for 6 hours, and I'll tell you right now, that's fine by me. I have no problem with that. So hopefully we'll get another hour or so in sooner than later. And if you guys enjoyed this, let me know. Join the Needless Things Podcast Facebook group. Shoot me an email at phantomtroublemaker@gmail.com, or just shoot Dave West a message on Facebook. And also the Needless Things Facebook page. I never put that over because its Facebook has rendered it nigh unto useless. But, what are you going to do? I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk around this recording studio desk, and I am going to sit down in the loud leather Phantom Zone chair and play some more Resident Evil. But I'll be thinking about you guys, because I love you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Needless Things Podcast. You're the best. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Downcast, or in the ears of a Trader Vic's employee. Love you. Mean it. Uh-huh.